It's the year 2330 when we spacefarers join Constellation and start exploring Starfield. Humanity has slowly begun colonizing the known galaxy, a swathe of which are now referred to as the settled systems. Technology has contributed to significant improvement or efficacy in industry, medicine, and quality of life. Cultural works continue to bolster the progress of human civilization with critically acclaimed works such as Bad People, Bad Jokes, Knock Knock, Who's There, Planet, Planet Who, If I Throw a Party, Will You Help Me Planet? And of course, where there is human innovation, there is conflict. Just like humanity's history on Earth, much of the progress or work produced in the settled systems can come from conflict or arise as a result of waging war. And it is evident from those scars it left behind on the participants, such as Sarah Morgan, or the relations between factions. The colony war was undoubtedly a very violent one, though it is a bit hard to tell, at least in terms of numbers, how bad it was. So in this video, we'll be looking at the lore of the colony war and exactly how devastating it was for humanity. There will be spoilers, and if you haven't checked out my other lore videos or starfieldwiki.net run by the team behind UESP, definitely do so if you're interested in all things Starfield. To set the stage for the scope of the colony war, or really any historical event, we have to examine the timeline of events that made it possible. Most significant is of course our species' exodus from the cradle of our civilization, planet Earth, in the Sol system. We explore the tragedy of Earth in great detail in our lore video about the subject. To summarize, the demise of our blue and green planet clearly forced us to grapple with the logistics of somehow evacuating billions of human beings while being able to supply all of the travel in space and the actual colonization process once they reached a planet. The sheer amount of work and resources in the span of less than 50 years that would have been needed to evacuate as many humans as possible from Earth most likely means that we humans had to sacrifice quite a lot of luxuries and living norms to avoid extinction. For example, the Earth colony ship Constant seems to be the only caretaker of trees and certain plant species from Earth when we're exploring the settled systems. It's heavily implied that creatures such as cats, horses, elephants, dogs, and more have also gone extinct as well. The Chocolate Lab's food even states Centauri Mills chocolates, shaped like an extinct canine called a Labrador Retriever. We also have various foods, such as a slice of steak, which states that they are created by a company called Synthameat, indicating the beef-like meat is 3D printed or synthetic in nature. We also encounter processing facilities, such as the one on Tau City 2, that indicates humans have been harvesting alien creatures for meat, nutrients, and other materials as well, which point to Earth livestock not exactly being a thing anymore, which in turn begs the question of where the highly pasteurized milk comes from in Starfield. It's a little overwhelming to think that millions of species of fungus, flowers, insects, birds, mammals, reptiles, fish, and so many more we are familiar with completely perished once Earth became desolated in the year 2203 after its atmosphere was stripped away. Now here's the important part to all of this. It's also more than likely that many humans also died on Earth, potentially as a result of panic, riots, or even mismanaged logistics. In a 1998 press release, the United Nations estimated that by the year 2150, the population of humans on Earth could reach 10.8 billion people, based on the data and stats by the Population Division of the Department of Economic and Social Affairs. Obviously, the numbers could be wildly different based on future data or whatever catastrophic series of events could occur in the future. A more recent analysis from 2017 by the same umbrella department at the UN has estimated humanity could number 11.2 billion people by the year 2100, with approximately 83 million being born every year after, despite recent fertility levels and the looming aging population crisis in many regions during the 21st century. So if you do the math based on this more recent analysis, we can determine maybe 15,300,000,000 humans to be alive or so by the year 2150. So we can assume for this video that maybe around 15 billion humans or so at most could have been alive by the time we found out that the Earth was doomed. According to one of the exhibits in the UC Vanguard Hall of Orientation, the United Colonies was established as the formal entity that would oversee the process of space colonization before any ship was even sent out. We're not exactly sure how well that would bode when it came to the different governments and nations of Earth having to essentially dissolve to form this entity, but poor organization or bureaucracy would be no surprise as to why a good portion of the population wouldn't have made it off the planet. We do have some hints from dialogue or remarks made by the characters in Starfield. When we stumble across a lunar star yard, for example, that indicates many ships were made, but it's left to our imagination as to if literally every single person would have been able to make it. What about criminals? If we factor in the energy cost of constructing grab drives and ships, added on top of the fact that you would need to also transport other cargoes such as building materials, tools, water, food, equipment, personal belongings, culturally important works, and so on in the same ships, it makes sense as to why so many things, species, and probably humans were left behind. Now, why more people in the Zeld systems or even the UC Vanguard exhibits wouldn't talk more about such a devastating loss of life could be because the deaths that happened on Earth were simply just accepted as part of the cost of evacuating Earth to escape extinction. Perhaps those numbers are suppressed or just not known, or perhaps the deaths that led to the levels of population we see in Starfield may have happened after or during the early stages of colonizing. I'm not surprised at all that the United Colonies basically ignored or skimped over the part where the actual colonizing happens. Even in today's schools, curriculums rarely teach the specifics and hardships of how absolutely miserable and dangerous frontier or transoceanic settlement really was. Lastly, we have to take into account sickness, ship malfunctions, exploration mishaps, local conflict, and a lot more factors into how population loss would work in space settlement. At this point in the timeline, we're not exactly sure how many billions or hundreds of millions may have effectively made off of Earth, or how many died working during the settlement process. More than likely also, based on human migration behavior and the fact that Jemison, the planet to New Atlantis, was the first planet to have seen a human colony ship apart from Mars, a bulk of the remaining human settlers probably went there first and spread out after. We could probably at this point speculate that the human population could be 10 billion at most, and 4 billion minimum based on the previous data and factors mentioned. Whatever the number may be, we're also not given a death toll for the subsequent Nerian War, which started in 2196. The Nerian War is described to have been a war of attrition and multiple small engagements between the United Colonies and the newborn Freestar Collective fleets due to the nature of the grab drives and dimensions of space. We're not sure how many died from these space naval battles, but seeing as how it became extremely unpopular with the people of the United Colonies, we can assume the societal and economic cost to at least be great if it drove up the prices of commodities and foods while causing families who lost their loved ones in combat to become bitter. The fact that in one of its two demands, the UC government demanded mineral rights on multiple planets as financial compensation is also strong evidence of economic loss. In terms of the death toll, perhaps we could put it in the thousands, with tens of thousands being a generous estimate, along with the loss of older equipment or ships used years prior for humanity's expansion. Then we have the Serpent's Crusade that occurred in the year 2240, 24 years after the end of the Nerian War, which does give us a death toll of thousands, potentially tens of thousands, over a long 23 years of conflict. Unfortunately, the other demand by the UC after the conclusion of the Nerian War, which was that no great faction could colonize more than 3 star systems, would lead to political tensions over the heated dispute over the Freestar Collective's colonization of Vesta in the Lunara system in the year 2308, 44 years after the end of the Serpent's Crusade. Diplomacy breaks down at this point, and now we can finally focus on the Colony War. The United Colonies, of course, doesn't really delve deep into their war crime of completely bombarding and annihilating the settlement of Vesta from orbit. We don't know how many died in the settlement, but we can definitely speculate it could have been thousands to tens of thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands. We can actually visit Vesta in the Lunara system. And it's really interesting to note that there are no notable landmarks or even remnants of settlements from orbit, unlike some other planets we can explore. Sarah Morgan tells us that she participated in the Battle of Cassiopeia, which if we look at the star map of the Solar Systems is basically in the middle of nowhere as far as military objectives go. It's clear that the colony wars spiraled out of control for both sides, where battles occurred whenever they could. We are told that entire armadas of warships were deployed, freestar mechs and fearsome alien creatures controlled by neurocontrol interfaces by the UC Xenowarfare Division clashed at multiple sites. We can actually visit the planet of Nira where such a battle occurred, as referred to by the subordinate of UC Captain Yang, who praises the miraculous defense of Clattuc Pass. We can observe the devastating marks of battle with rusting mechs littering the battlefield. Remnants of xenoweapons still roam the surface of the planet. As we note, judging from the placement of the craters, that severe tactical bombardment most likely took place. If Nira was a hospitable planet before, it certainly isn't anymore, with hostile creatures, toxic fumes, and lawless ecliptics and pirates holding up. It's clear that bad blood had been built up between the two sides as a result of the fighting, which manifested when FC commander of the 1st Cavalry Mech Division, Paxton Hall, refused to obey the ceasefire and instead continued attacking with his remaining soldiers to try to take the enemy position so that the deaths of his subordinates wouldn't have been for naught. This is certainly a parallel to the similar sentiments of some on both sides of the Great War or the First World War, as when, despite the armistice on the 11th of November at 11 AM, officers and soldiers continued killing one another. While we are not given a count on injuries or missing in action personnel, the United Colonies Colony War Memorial dedicated to the fallen tells us that there were about 30,000 deaths, at least with the United Colonies. We are not given an exact figure for the death toll on the side of the Freestar Collective, but we can assume a similar amount, if not a bit more, due to the UC's clear advantage in some of their military technologies. So at most, we could estimate that about 100,000 or more military casualties occurred during the Colony War. Of course, we also don't know civilian casualties either, but we can assume at minimum tens of thousands, as wars often touch civilians on any side. Displacement, famine, sickness, and collateral damage often lead to a loss of civilian life during wars. We've also seen the remnants of Londinium, which we also explore in a different lore video, which was also razed to the ground, supposedly due to the Terramorphs overwhelming it. We may also need to look at starvation, or at least wartime rationing, as it's been cited multiple times during the UC Vanguard questline. The Asiles were hunted to near extinction by the people of Londinium for their sustenance. We also have to take into account that civilians did involve themselves and did indeed die in the war as active participants, most notably at the Battle of Cheyenne in the year 2311, in what we can speculate to have been a desperate last stand made up of ragtag non-military ships mixed in with organized FC starfleets against the UC Armada, which barely worked and painted the UC in an extremely bad light at the same time. All of this is still, statistically speaking, hardly a dent in a supposed human population that is most likely still in the billions if we are to speculate on the numbers. The Starfield wiki also speculates as well that there are still likely a minimum of millions of humans spread across the settled systems, citing that Ryujin Industries has claimed to have had millions of customers in their internal employee discussions, and that the upper limit could very well be in the billions in the 24th century. The historian on Titan also confirms for us that the Colony War was nowhere near as bad as the Second World War in terms of at least the death toll.
There was once a war so big that they say all of the world was involved. This was actually the second time it happened. They fought because a terrible man named Hitler rose to power and slaughtered many innocents. Millions were lost. Even the Colony War pales in comparison.
Which gives us another hint for a general estimate of wartime deaths. So all of our discovered information leads us to several interpretations of how bad the Colony War was, but also why it was bad. First, at least in terms of numbers, it was nowhere near a lot of the disastrous wars we are familiar with in our own reality, whether it's the Mongol conquest or something like the Russian Civil War. This isn't to diminish the tragic loss of human life, regardless in the Colony War, because 100,000 or so deaths is still a lot no matter what the context. Perhaps even worse are the marks on those who survived. PTSD is clearly present in Sarah Morgan and the others you can interact with who do talk about their experiences during the Colony War. It's also worth noting what the effect of the war would have had on surviving families and friends. To put this part into perspective, as the in-game historian uses it as a comparison, American military deaths from the Second World War was just over 400,000, which pales in comparison to the other countries, yet the effects of the war on both the survivors and those at home, never mind other aspects of society, could still be felt, widely discussed, or remembered quite strongly up into even the 21st century. Second, the colony war saw to an untold number of war crimes or questionable aggressions committed by both sides, which of course the soldiers and commanding officers felt like they took a fall for, such as Francois Sanon and Paxton Hall. This created animosity towards the ruling governments among some portions of both the UC and FC populace, who still praised those tried for war crimes as betrayed heroes. Undoubtedly, this has created some instability in either society. And while we've talked about the mental and physical effects of the colony war, we have yet to mention the widespread political ramifications that we spacefarers can observe as we travel throughout the settled systems. It's clear the loss of hundreds, maybe thousands of ships, and tens of thousands of willing soldiers severely impact the ability of either the FC or UC to regulate or police their space. As an example, the Freestar Collective Rangers don't even have a dozen members, which is absolutely crazy if we think about it. This vacuum of territorial power leads to where lawlessness and dangerous elements of human civilization, such as the Spacers, Bandits, Crimson Fleet Pirates, rogue mercenaries, and other groups, can take advantage of the lack of faction control. The colony war's greatest effect in this regard is when it's clear that even the United Colonies' SysDef fleet can barely take on the Crimson Fleet, a supposed ragtag group of disorganized pirates in direct naval combat without high casualties. For the Freestar Collective internally, the colony war seems to have also produced an unfavorable quality of life, where the ruling council of governors, in tandem with the ruthless corporations, keep the populations suppressed or severely dependent on corrupt systems that keep them suppressed, as we find out from Ron Hope's Dark Secrets and the implications of Aurora that we explore in another lore video. Perhaps even as with some post-war societies, the usage of drugs spiked as well, leading to an unhealthier population. More than likely as well for either faction's populace, the economic repercussions from the colony war are still being felt as wars of this scale not only destroy communities but disrupt entire economies and spending power for a long time, as many of us may be familiar with in our reality. Lastly, the colony war has seen to both governments and people turtling up to try to recover, which means they're less interested in external matters until they're the ones being affected. As indicated by members of Constellation, interest in space exploration as a result has plummeted hard with the public, and we can assume other areas of human advancement could have taken a hit as well, as more people focus more on survival rather than strictly growth. We also do see a tense strain on the diplomatic relations between the current UC administration and the Freestar Collective, although the uncomfortable peace has produced favorable results, such as the locking away of now forbidden technologies, such as xeno-weapons and mechs. It remains to be seen how relations will evolve between the two as time progresses, though we do despair at what seems to be unavoidable human nature, fighting in infinite space over infinite resources at this point. The colony war is an interesting backdrop against which the universe of Starfield is presented to us. While I would have loved a few more details as any historian would, I also did enjoy picking out some of the environmental storytelling and picking up on the smaller details hinted at by other characters. Just as with any human matter, the perspectives on the colony war wildly differ, but it is undeniable that regardless of sentiment or faction, the war scarred the fabric and inhabitants of the settled systems permanently. I hope you enjoyed this lore video. If you do, and you want more lore videos or more gaming content, reviews, definitely subscribe to the channel. And until next time, I'll see you all out there in the Starfield.